Mr. Lewis and I. It was the day before Galesburg High School let out for the Christmas holidays. I was sitting in my seat for a biology lecture and final lab. The teacher, Mr. Lewis, was leading the class with his normal boring lectures about stuff I really didn't care about. It seemed he had taken a hard line on discipline, and I, as a tough guy in training, was not buying it at all. Being a rather bad student, and an even worse pain in the ass during class most of the term, he didn't particularly like me. I had studied the night before this class, but he was non-observant when I kept raising my hand to answer the questions. I figured that I could make an impression if I studied just a little and volunteered answers once during the term. He might notice. Maybe he thought I wanted to go to the restroom, which would have been an automatic no. I can't remember, but I must have abused it once or twice during that term. This time, in all honesty, I had what I thought were correct answers. When he did finally call on me, I didn't know that particular answer, which just reinforced his attitude towards me. After missing the question, I made a smart-ass remark, and I was promptly told I would not be joining the lab work next period. I had to sit in my seat while the others went to the back of the room and performed one last experiment. I was not at all happy about this decision. When the next period came, all the students left and went to the back of the room. There was talking, laughing, and generally having a good time. I was missing out. Not that I didn't have it coming. During that period in my life, I was never that social. Being made to stay behind was just simply embarrassing. I sat there, pretty much pissed off. I looked around the room and saw nothing I was interested in until I discovered he had left his briefcase on the lab table located in the front of the room, within reaching distance of my desk. This was like leaving a pile of manure in the middle of a field and not expecting flies to be attracted. I sat there for about 20 minutes and fantasized about what would happen if, and suddenly I came up with an idea. Albeit not a good idea, but an idea just the same. Sometimes you must get points for creativity. Now you must understand, this is 1963, and many teachers still carried that old-fashioned leather satchel with a locking top. They were made for a lifetime of use. They were ugly, clumsy, heavy, and somewhat waterproof. Waterproof was the key. So, I went about implementing my carefully thought-out plan of retaliation against a system that would permit a teacher like this to treat me the way he did today. If you're going to protest, you got to have a reason. I cautiously looked toward the back of the room to see that everybody was busy, especially Mr. Lewis. With that, I eased out of my chair and stepped up to the lab sink. There it was, the satchel in all its splendor, the official badge for a teacher being the biggest dweeb I'd ever met. I carefully unsnapped the top and looked inside. It was full of pencils, crumpled papers, grade books, term papers, and other stuff I didn't care about. I gently picked up the case and quietly placed it in the lab sink. It was a perfect fit. I turned on the water and filled it up about 2/3 full of fresh, cool, fluoride-filled water. Then I gently snapped the top in place. The hardest part came when I tried to pick the thing up. It was already somewhat heavy, and by now, filled with water, it weighed a ton. I struggled to pick it up and get it back on the counter, and then quickly slid back into my seat. It wasn't but just a few minutes before I heard Mr. Lewis tell the students it was time to go. So pack up your stuff and take your seats. They all shuffled to the front and in due time took their seats. Mr. Lewis started lecturing again, and that's when I saw the first flaw in my carefully thought-out plan. The briefcase, although a strong and substantial piece of equipment, was not a real good carrier of water. I could see the worn cracks on the edges and droplets of water starting to form. The longer I sat there, the bigger the droplets and the wider my eyes got. I kept thinking, oh shit, you're going to get in trouble again. What was going to happen if he discovered this before my escape into the safe confines of the hallway? I was in a state of extreme stress. Something felt by a guy who honestly didn't care about getting into trouble. Finally, the bell rang. In a flash, I was in the hallway, falsely assuming I was in some kind of a safe zone. As what happens in many crimes, the person who committed that crime goes back to the scene to watch the outcome of his devious plan. At 16 years old, I was honestly just that dumb. As I stood in the hallway, little did I know what was about to happen was going to be one of those life-changing events. Mr. Lewis was a tall, very slender man with a big hook nose, sort of like Ichabod Crane in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He was as anal as he was a dork. In those days, teachers at GHS had to move from classroom to classroom with their teaching load. He was one of those teachers who each day just stormed out of the room at 100 miles an hour, grabbed his briefcase on the way, and rushed to the next room. Only today was just one small adjustment he had to make in his routine. Standing out in the hall, I watched as this time he stayed in the room until everyone left. He headed for the door, reaching for his briefcase as he passed it, all in one flowing movement. To his surprise, when he grabbed the briefcase, it was partially stuck to the table by the weight of the water. The case came up as his arm reached its fullest point, and then he was jerked back. Nearly falling, he tipped the case over. That's when the class came open, and he got drenched in water, grade books, and essays. Now that was an attitude changer. This normally laid back and kind of sissy guy looked up and saw me in the hallway, smiling. This was not the most wise decision on my part, because as our eyes met, you could see the fire flaming out of his ears. He was angry, to say the least. He turned and took a step toward the door. As any self-respecting wannabe tough guy would do in a situation like this, I ran like a scalded dog. Of all the things I might be, fast was not one of them. I think he caught me in about 10 steps. He was motivated, and I was just scared. He was not in the mood for levity when he reached me. He tackled me in the middle of the hall, got me firmly by the ear, and twisted it, bringing me up to my tiptoes. Each time I tried to get away, he just twisted harder. Down the hall we went, dancing in tandem to a tune I had heard before. I knew this was not going to be a pleasant experience just before the holidays, but this is a season for forgiveness. Sure it was. We got to the principal's office, and he didn't even wait to be announced. He just burst in, threw me down on a chair. The principal saw me, and it wasn't a surprise he knew my first name, having already had heart-to-heart conversations with the man numerous times. He saw Mr. Lewis, who was very vocal and wet from head to toe. He figured out quickly I was not being nominated for an award. The principal asked Mr. Lewis what had happened. He didn't print a very good picture, and after hearing his side, the principal asked me why I had done this. He didn't ask if, he asked why. I just don't understand either their attitudes toward me. I said it was the holidays, a time for forgiveness and retrospection, not retribution. Somehow, that went over their heads, and they didn't hear what I thought were calming words. Again, as any self-respecting kid of that era would say, the words came out, I don't know. With that, the principal told Mr. Lewis to leave, and I had to stay. I got the feeling I wasn't going to like what followed. After numerous words of blah, 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 blah about wisdom, the words that came out loud and clear were, to finish in any high school, you will need to bring your parents to school with you after the holidays to pick up your transcripts. They had thrown me out of school for good, and the only way I could get my transcripts sent to another school was for my parents to come in and make the request. Bad news for Dave. These were things I didn't want my folks to hear, but eventually they would hear them anyway. I decided it would be not to my advantage to tell my parents before the holidays. You know, I didn't want to ruin it for them. So I went on as if nothing happened. Although it's hard to believe, this was one of my lesser problems for Christmas vacation in 1963. I had an after-school job, so I had to work almost every day during vacation. Christmas went off without a hitch. It was a warmer than normal period, and it rained quite often. I had friends, some older, who were planning a party up for New Year's Eve. We had pooled our money and rented a room at a local motel. In addition, we had somebody buy beer and liquor for the party. At that point in my life, the only drinking I had ever done was to steal a few sips of beer from my dad. New Year's Eve came, and I had to work early that night. After finishing around 8 o'clock, I hurried over to the party. Upon arriving, I poured myself a glassful of whiskey and managed to drink the entire glassful within an hour. Smart move for a guy who'd never had whiskey before. The girls, who were planning to come to the party, decided they were going to a movie first. For whatever reason, the other guys at the party decided I should be the one to pick them up from the theater. Why? I'll never know. I had no idea how drunk I was, but let me just say, I don't remember anything for the next hour that followed. It seems that on the way to the theater, I drove through the wet front yards of some of the more prominent people in Galesburg. Needless to say, the yards didn't look as well groomed after my drive-through in town. The police were called. I had just arrived at the parking lot across from the theater when a police car pulled up behind me, turned on its lights, and had me get out of the car. That was far more difficult than I ever thought it would be. I can remember them asking what was wrong with me, and I tried to say nothing, but my mouth didn't work. That was very strange for a guy who normally had an answer for everything. After a few more questions, which I couldn't answer, they put me in the front seat of the squad car to drive to the station. Why the front seat is still a mystery to me. Sitting in that front seat, with a cop on either side, was cozy, but it was also hot as hell. The hot air coming from the vents was making me sick. I tried to tell them I was sick, but all that would come out of my mouth was, "Let me out of this car." They ignored me. I can't imagine why. Around a minute later, the combination of booze, heat, stress, and stupidity caused me to projectile vomit into the heat vents of the squad car and all over each officer. This was not a smart move for a drunken teenager in a small town in 1963. They took offense to my actions, stopped the car, and one of the officers pulled me out by the collar and started shaking me violently. As a young wannabe tough guy, I took a swing at him. Bad move. He carried what they call a sap. A sap is a woven leather piece that looks like a Chinese finger clamp and is filled with BBs. Without further warning, he hit me in the side of the head, and I dropped like a stone. The next thing I remember was a cop on each side of me dragging me up the stairs of the police station, my toes going clunk, clunk, clunk on the steps. At the station, they put me on a stool in the middle of a room. Not a smart move. I fell off. After falling off numerous times, they told me, "Next time you fall off that stool, we're going to leave you on the floor." With that, I fell off. I don't remember much for the next couple of hours, but I do remember hearing my mother coming into the room. My mother could be very animated when she was mad, and she was animated. She took one look at me lying in the pool of vomit and was not at all cooperative with the police officers. With that, they gave her a mop and a bucket and told her if she wanted me cleaned up, she could do it herself. I kept my eyes closed, as I knew eventually she was going to stop hollering at the police, and I was going to be next. I knew I was safe for at least a short time while she tried to eat their faces off. That was when my dad and Grandpa showed up. They shuffled me around, put me in my grandpa's car, and by this time it was cold and I was wet. I started to complain about being cold. My grandpa replied, "You've got enough antifreeze in you, you're not going to freeze." It was a very long ride home. The next morning, I woke up in my grandparents' house as my parents were divorced and my father was living with them. I experienced for the first time that "what the hell did you do last night" feeling. You never get over that first moment. The next thing that comes out of your mouth is "I'll never do it again," something I would say many times in the years to follow. I stayed in bed as long as I could, but my stomach gave me up. I had to vomit again, or at least try. That's when you get to experience the dry heaves. Things didn't go well that morning after too many experiences. It was afternoon when all of us finally got to talk. I took the opportunity to tell them about school. None of this went over very well, a time my family has brought to my attention many times. In a period of 2 weeks, I was thrown out of Galesburg High School for good. I was arrested for DUI, lost my driver's license for 14 months, and ended up with a nickname Buzo. I was arrested for resisting arrest. I was arrested for the destruction of property. I was put on probation for 6 months. Overnight, I was moved out of my mother's house in Galesburg and relocated to Mequon to live with my father and grandparents. I was later admitted to Valley High School in Fairview, an event that changed my life forever. I was in a new place where I got to start over again, and for some reason I took advantage of it. I went to a school where everybody got along. I met my wife and met friends whom I'll never forget. The next 14 months without a license was the longest period I've ever experienced in my life. I had gone down the wrong path in Galesburg. For some unknown reason, I took the time to daily walk in the woods and just think about the future while living in Mequon. I concluded that even though I was in a world of shit, if I looked at it as a blessing, I had the opportunity to reinvent myself. Just how was still a mystery. I knew I would never be any type of high-ranking student, and I was not at all that impressed with the nerds in the first place. I knew I had to show who I was right away. Going to a small school in rural America with a graduating class of 50 plus is far different than a school that has a graduating class of 400 plus. These people had gone to school together since first grade. There was very little they didn't know about each other. If they were friends in grade and junior high, they would be friends forever. Just about everybody's interest was agriculture, mining, or factory work. They were salt-of-the-earth people who were willing to give a jerk like me a chance to prove who he was or who he might become. The time frame for decision-making was upon me. I either wanted to change and succeed, or I didn't. It was my decision. Small towns have an information channel that can be very efficient. There was not one person in the school who didn't know I was coming and the reason why. I decided to start my new life as the nice guy I always wanted to be. There was a guy in Galesburg whom I had run around with and wanted to emulate. He knew everybody and they liked him. He was poor as a church mouse, but always wore an ugly green sweater and a white t-shirt that set him apart. He always showed respect and was willing to listen to anyone who had a problem. I had attended Lombard Junior High, and their colors were green and gold. I decided I would wear that ugly green sweater from Lombard to the new school to set myself apart. The coach looked at me one day in front of a bunch of guys and told me to get rid of that sweater because I looked like a toad. From that day forward, I was nicknamed Toad. Whatever happened to that green sweater, I don't know. The first day at Valley, I was as nervous as I'd ever been. I was greeted by the other kids with respect, and all I had to do was prove myself, just like I dreamed it would be. Will this change work, or will I continue to get into trouble? There were other ornery kids here, but nobody bad. What a blessing. I never got past being ornery, which has always been part of my lifestyle, but I learned some moderation. Most importantly, I was accepted as much as a stranger could be. I was elected as the senior attendant to homecoming that year. Even today, close friends still call me Toad or Buzo.